Hi, welcome back to Father-Offspring Interviews. This is episode 31. So, last week we talked about stress and depression and SSRIs and some of their side effects. And this prompted a number of questions that we are going to follow up on here today. So, first, someone said, I just wanted to know about the relation, if there is any, between too much stress and anhedonia.
Okay, so some definitions, clarifications, all that. Anhedonia, jargony term for one of the defining characteristics of depression, hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure, anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. That used to be sort of what people thought the negative affect of depression was about. And it was very much tied to seemingly a depletion of the neurotransmitter dopamine. Dopamine's about reward. Dopamine is released by cocaine and other euphoriants, all of that. So there's a depletion of dopamine signaling in long term stress. And one of the consequences is anhedonia. Okay, old version of that statement is anhedonia. You lose the ability to feel pleasure. What people have learned since then is what dopamine is doing is actually considerably more interesting. Dopamine is not so much about reward, it's about anticipating reward. And that's the thing that gets done in when someone is anhedonic most meaningfully. On top of that, dopamine is about not just the anticipation of reward, but the motivation that drives you to do what's needed, the goal directed behavior driven by the anticipation to do the reward. So when one's talking about anhedonia, these days, more correct would be rather than lack of pleasure, lack of anticipation of, lack of motivation to get it. Okay, so its relationship with stress. Stress. Ninth grade biology term. I think I've mentioned it previously, but hopefully everyone has had it before and promptly forgot it. The term homeostasis. Homeostasis. You've got an ideal body temperature. You've got an ideal level of glucose in your bloodstream. You have an ideal acidity to your nose hairs. You've got everything is in homeostatic balance. So, where does stress come in with that? First off, there's this, I have to admit, somewhat irritating term that gained great trendiness in the 1980s, 1990s or so, replacing homeostasis with the term allostasis. And it's just sort of a gussied up version of the homeostasis concept. It's the notion that being in optimum, you can have different optimums under different circumstances, and it's not just paying attention to what's going on just in this organ, but how everything affects this organ, all of that. And it came up with this notion, this term allostatic load. If you're putting a lot of wear and tear on the body trying to maintain allostasis. Embarrassingly, I've never been all that taken with that term, embarrassingly, because it was coined by my PhD advisor, Bruce McEwen of Rockefeller University, who I adored to bits, but somehow it just always struck me like, oh, just stick with fancy homeostasis. So, homeostasis, allostasis, you are in equilibrium. Everything is exactly where your body wants it to be. So, how does stress fit into this? Go to a stress conference, and it is guaranteed the very first lecture of the conference, they're going to pull up some elderly member of the field who hasn't made any contributions in 30 to 40 years, and where most of the youngins there have never heard of the person. And they get the first talk, which is called What is Stress? And the conclusion always is it's complicated because it turns out it's a completely undefined term. For my money, it's been very useful to divide this nebulous stress thing into two different terms. You're in homeostatic balance, everything's perfect, everything's optimal. A stressor is anything in the outside world that knocks you out of homeostatic balance. You're a zebra and a lion has leapt out and ripped your stomach open and your innards are dragging in the dust. This counts as being out of homeostatic balance. Or you were that lion and you are half starved to death and you better be able to chase down that zebra. A stressor is anything that knocks you out of homeostatic balance. The stress response is what your body does to reestablish homeostasis. So, old version stress response, the term everybody knows is adrenaline, American term epinephrine. That is only the tip of the iceberg. And I have waxed poetic many times already about the much, much better stress hormone in all of this glucocorticoids, cortisol. But with the onset of a stressor, you secrete adrenaline, you secrete glucocorticoids, you secrete a whole bunch of other hormones. You stop secreting sex hormones, you stop secreting growth hormone. There's a whole array of endocrine changes that constitute the stress response. And the critical thing in the field is if you have been knocked out of homeostatic balance by a physical stressor, by something real in the environment, you've been made too hot, you're starving, you're dehydrated, you're injured, any such thing, the stress response is exactly what you want to do with your body to reestablish homeostasis. What does it do? What it does is perfect whether you are that zebra running for your life or a lion running for a meal. It mobilizes energy, it hands it to your thigh muscles or whatever is hurtling you across the savannah. It shuts off everything in your body that's not essential. It shuts down growth, it shuts down tissue repair, it shuts down reproduction. The logic is obvious. You know, you're running for your life and a lion's two steps behind you. You know, ovulate some other time. Don't do it right now. Don't grow antlers tonight. Don't even think about sperm. With the onset of stress, you shut down all the long term building projects, and all of this makes perfect sense. And in addition, some of the short term effects of stress in the brain, we've talked about previously, you release more dopamine, you feel alert, aroused, your memory gets better, flashbulb memory, you're getting more oxygen, glucose delivered to the brain. So, this is what the stress response is about in response to a stressor for 99% of beasts that have ever lived on this planet. When you get to us, when you get to other primates, when you get to elephants and dolphins and other socially smart species, suddenly you got to expand your definition. Yes, yes, a stressor can be when something has happened which knocks you out of homeostatic balance. But if instead a stressor can be when you think you're just about to be knocked out of homeostatic balance in anticipation of, you can mobilize an anticipatory stress response, or you can do a real human specialty. If you keep mobilizing the stress response because you anticipate a real stressor is going to come, and there really is no real stressor that's coming, we have technical terms for you. You're being neurotic as hell. You're being anxious. You're being any of this. You're being really smart in that you can invent psychological stress, psychosocial stress, and be worried about being thrown out of homeostatic balance when that doesn't actually make sense. You know, no matter how badly you do on an exam, you are probably not going to have your bones scattered over an acre on the savannah. Psychological, social stress, that's a primate invention to be able to do that. And that gets you the central punchline of the field. Stress response, what it does for your body, is probably 150 million years old. There were dinosaurs out there running for their lives, secreting the exact same adrenaline molecules that we do. And it's only very recently, I don't know, last 10 million years or so, that primates have gotten smart enough to have psychological stress, which is to say, to have chronic stress for things that aren't actually there. And the punchline of the whole field is if you were stressed for 3 minutes running for your life, unless you turn on the stress response for 3 minutes, it's fantastic and it mobilizes energy and it keeps you from like hitting puberty right now when you don't really need to do it in this. And it's wonderful. But if instead you turn it on chronically for psychosocial reasons, you pay a price because that's not what it evolved for. And the cornerstone of what stress related disease is about is the stuff you're doing. If you do it for 3 minutes or 3 hours, it's great. If you do it for 3 months or 3 decades, it's a disaster. If you're running for your life, it is a very good thing to increase your blood pressure. If you are stressed 2 hours a day sitting in traffic jams and are hypertensive, then This is not a good thing. You get stress-induced hypertension. If you shut off tissue repair for the next 3 minutes, it's not a big deal. If you do it chronically, there's also so the backbone of stress-related disease is this is a system that has evolved in every vertebrate on Earth. Fish, birds, toads, reptiles, dinosaurs, whatever, and all of us mammals secrete glucocorticoids and adrenaline when we're stressed. And it's only us that could sit and turn it on worrying about global warming. That can have chronic activation of the stress response for reasons that would make no sense to like a hippo out there. Try to explain to a hippo, like, oh my God, is Social Security going to be there when I'm elderly? And it's going to have no idea what you're talking about because it only knows about physical stressors. So, amid the whole list of things that can go wrong in your body when you are chronically stressed, increased risk of cardiovascular disease, increased risk of type 2 diabetes, increased problem with glycemic control if you are a type 1 diabetic, increased gastrointestinal problems, inflammatory bowel syndrome, impotency, irregular menstrual cycles, a whole array of stuff, more vulnerability to infections. In addition, chronic stress does a bunch of unhelpful things in your brain. It disrupts memory. Glucocorticoids soak your hippocampus for 3 minutes, and your memory consolidation then is enhanced. You will remember where you were forever. Do it chronically, and memory gets worse. Do it chronically, and you're more prone towards anxiety. Do it chronically, and because of stress hormone effects in the prefrontal cortex, you have more trouble regulating your behavior. You become more impulsive. You become interesting activities in a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate. If you are chronically stressed, empathy becomes more difficult. So, in that whole list, what else is on the list? If you were chronically stressed, the short term dump of dopamine, because this is an exciting roller coaster, you do it chronically, and dopamine signaling gets suppressed. And one of the potential consequences of long term chronic stress thus includes anhedonia. So, that is a subset. It's one of the ones that most powerfully links chronic psychological stress with clinical depression.
So, to sort of continue the follow up from last week, but focusing on a different element, next is the question: haven't SSRIs been proven not to work?
Okay, this has been a major controversy. Just as a quick recap from last week's episode, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter. There's lots of reasons to think there's too little of it in one part of the brain. In depression, what SSRIs do is cause serotonin to stick around in the synapse between two neurons longer and thus potentiate a signal. You get more of a serotonin oomph. The person feels better. You got to speculate maybe they had too little serotonin in the first place. So, SSRIs like Prozac, Paxil, a whole family of them have been the frontline antidepressants for decades now. And there's this whole controversy of, whoa, they may not actually work. Maybe the serotonin hypothesis of too little serotonin is actually completely misguided. And for my purposes, I think this has been a tempest in a teapot, whatever it is. I think this has been way overblown as soon as you recognize no one on earth was suggesting that SSRIs all on their own would take care of every single kind of depression. No one on earth would suggest that it would be 100% effective at doing that. Depression also involves stuff with norepinephrine and dopamine and glutamate and substance P and CRH and a whole menagerie of these things. Serotonin SSRIs just tend to be towards the top of the list. Not for everyone, though. Depends on the type of depression. Depression is extremely heterogeneous. There's severe depression, there's reactive depression, reacting to something awful, where it officially becomes a psychopathological disease when your response has been going on for too long. It could be an endogenous one that just runs on its own. It could be one that only happens during winter seasons. It could be one dominated by the exhaustion of depression far more than the negative thoughts. This kind is called atypical depression, and it's got a lot to do with chronic fatigue syndrome. It's a whole bunch of different diseases. So there's absolutely zero reason to get pissed off at SSRIs just because they do not evaporate every depression and every type of individual of every flavor of depression. It still remains the frontline antidepressant. And the notion that something's up with serotonin is still at the top of everyone's list, with the proviso brought up last week: selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs. Ooh, these drugs only work on the serotonin system. Also turns out they work on norepinephrine and dopamine. So serotonin and maybe some drooling over into norepinephrine and dopamine still remains the leading hypotheses.
As a similar question, someone said, I heard that SSRIs can increase the risk of suicide. Isn't that a problem that is paradoxical?
Yeah, that's mighty paradoxical. You're feeling anhedonic and suicidal, and they give you a drug and it makes you feel suicidal, which seems problematic. This is another huge controversy in the field. First off, right off the bat, there are instances where you put people on SSRIs and their suicide risk increases. Everything should emphasize this is maybe 5% of people at the most. The studies range from like 1 to 10% or so, but no surprise, this has grabbed the headlines, all of that. And it seems to be particularly common in kids, adolescents, being treated with SSRIs. Still very, very rare. Okay, so let's try to unpack what's going on when SSRIs are having this paradoxical effect. You can have bad news happening in two different ways. First one, you become suicidal. You are more likely to attempt suicide. It influences your actions. In contrast, it could cause you to have more suicidal ideation. You think about it more. Two separate things, and probably what's going on depends on whether we're talking about the rare instances, I reiterate clumsily, the rare instances where SSRIs increase actual suicidality versus suicidal ideation. Okay, the actual suicidality, the acting upon it. So we have, as a key symptom of depression, this thing called psychomotor retardation. I alluded to it just before, anhedonia. You also have a sense of grief. You also ruminate. You can't stop the negative thoughts. And very commonly, everything is exhausting. It is tiring to do. It is tiring to think. You are completely enervated. As I said before, that's what dominates in this atypical depression: psychomotor retardation. Okay, so that's one of the things on the list there. Depression most commonly involves anhedonia and grief and rumination and psychomotor retardation. So now let's look at what's happening when you take an SSRI and it's working. Okay. We have here an hour diagram. You're feeling great, 100% happy. You're in the depths of your depression. And this is where you start taking SSRIs, and it works and you feel better. And what we're seeing here is that in a subset of individuals, right around here, you get suicidal behavior. Right around there, this becomes a problem. Why is this? And what we see here is our four big old symptoms of depression. What do we got? We got anhedonia and rumination and grief and psychomotor at the bottom. And the critical thing here is the SSRIs are fixing up different pieces at different speeds. And in this scenario, you happen to be the sort of person, who knows how you turned out that way, but something with how you got wired, where the psychomotor stuff disappears very quickly. you get back lots of energy, an ability to mobilize, an ability to figure out how to make a noose out of like shredded mattress in your hospital bed, things that while you're still feeling anhedonic and grief stricken and ruminating on the negativity, all of that. And this is in the circumstance where there's this narrow window. You still feel basically just as terrible about life, but you got energy back. And that's where you see somebody suddenly having the energy to commit suicide. And people who deal with severely depressed hospitalized patients with suicide watches, you know, you don't worry about suicide from someone who is so depressed they cannot even get out of bed. They cannot change their pajamas because it's too exhausting. No, when they're starting to get back their energy, that's when the danger occurs. Okay, so there's that aspect of it that during the bounce back, paradoxically, ironically, the psychomotor stuff has gotten better, but everything else is bad and you can act upon it. Related to that, perhaps with the suicidal ideation, is as you begin to get better, you will be able to be more accurately reflective about things, about your life, instead of having all of your effort going into being able to like eat an ramen noodles that haven't been cooked or something, and that sends you back to bed for 15 hours. What you're getting, you could begin to get some objectivity, some reflection, which is a very good time to see just how catastrophically ill you are when you are majorly depressed. And you see something similar in schizophrenia. Schizophrenia has high incidences of attempts at suicide, and it is most common when people are being medicated successfully or during a period where their schizophrenic psychosis is in remission, when they can think clearly, when they can reflect clearly. During those times, about 50% of people with schizophrenia attempt suicide, which is higher than during a psychosis. What does that mean? When you are clear headed enough to see what this damn disease has done to you the rest of the time, if that's when you are most likely to try to end your life, that makes a certain amount of sense. That may be what's going on with the suicidal ideation as well. As the SSRIs begin to work, it gives you clear enough of a perspective that you can focus on just what a disaster this has been in all regards. Amid that, there's all sorts of neurochemical models you could come up with as to why you were more likely to get those paradoxical things in some people more than others. And that's going to be relevant in the next question. All that said, though, is uh, does this mean, ooh, be suspicious of SSRIs, be suspicious about antidepressants in general? No, it could be over medicated. It could be used for completely stupid, capricious reasons, et cetera, et cetera. Nonetheless, an unmedicated major depression is one of the most life threatening diseases there are out there. So the suicidality in the form of ideation or actually acting upon it is for real as a risk factor. It is very rare, though. And it's probably not because the SSRIs are not working, is because they're doing different pieces at different speeds, and where you potentially get insight while everything else still looks as dark as it was yesterday.
So, one more follow up from last episode's topic is, can the postsynaptic neuron downregulate its serotonin receptors over time?
Yes, and this brings us immediately to this issue of how much are SSRIs having an effect on the amount of serotonin signaling? Okay, we have this scenario here. We have on top the required by law diagram of a synapse. A synapse, the axon terminal on the left, all axon terminals are on the left, that releases neurotransmitters. The left. I see the left is actually on this side. And on the left, we've got the axon terminal, which in response to an action potential dumps neurotransmitters that go floating across the synapse and bind to receptors on this side, serotonin receptors, for example, and that cause an effect. So in this scenario, say what do we got there? We got what did I draw? We've got two receptors, and thus we're getting two asterisks worth of response. Then there's people who just happen to have three receptors there. It's more responsive. You get more of an oomph, more of an asterisk oomph. Some people who have less, and it's less effective signaling, all of that. But what the question alludes to is you could change the number of those receptors in different circumstances. Jargony term, there can be auto regulation. You can up regulate. You could increase the number of your neurotransmitter receptors to make the system more responsive. You could down regulate. You do it in circumstances that could make certain sense. If somebody yells at you all the time, you stop listening to them after a while. If you flood the postsynaptic neuron with tons and tons of neurotransmitters, it kind of stops listening to some. It down regulates its receptor number. It kind of blunts sensitivity as a bit of a compensation. If the presynaptic, if the axon terminal neuron is just whispering all the time, you increase the number of receptors so you listen more acutely. Okay, so we've got this auto regulation. We've got the possibility of increasing or decreasing the numbers. So, what have we got here? Backwards. So, here's the simple version of what SSRIs are doing. So, we got somebody who, in this scenario, is just secreting a sliver, just a little bit of serotonin. I say suddenly remembering where I am, just secreting a little bit of serotonin. And the problem is, if you have too little serotonin, you got a depression. And you throw in SSRIs, last week bit of detail, it blocks removing of serotonin from the synapse, the reuptake of them. So the serotonin sticks around longer. You have more of an emphatic oomph there. And as a result, you feel better. This is how the world should work if the problem is that there's too little serotonin, and what you do here is you just boost up the amount of serotonin signaling there and things get better. All along, beginning to get at these issues of suicidality, beginning to get at issues of why the drugs don't work in some people, beginning to get at the issue that a drug like an SSRI is doing stuff to your synapses within, I don't know, minutes to hours. You typically don't feel less depressed for days to weeks. There's a weird time course disconnect. So here is the leading model as to what might actually be going on, which is so damn confusing. My students have conniptions when I force them to know this for exams and stuff because it's incredibly baroquely complicated and may actually be going on. Okay, so in this scenario, we throw all of dogma out the window and postulate the problem on top is there's too much serotonin being released. The problem is too much. Decades worth of neuroscientists are turning over in their graves in this scenario. In this hypothetical scenario, we've got the neuron on the left releasing 3 units of serotonin when less than that is the norm and hits its three receptors there. And the result is you are depressed. You get, what did I draw here? You get two asterisks worth of badness. Now, what do is you throw in SSRIs. What are they going to do? In the second diagram, they're going to increase the serotonin signal even more. What's that going to do? If the problem is too much serotonin, you've got even more serotonin now. The prediction is early on, the response to an SSRI might be making the depression worse, perhaps generating suicidality. Okay, so this might be occurring over hours to a couple of days. And what's going on is the second neuron, the neuron on the right, is saying, what is going on? It was bad enough when there were 3 hours worth, but now there's 4 hours worth coming out. Screw that. We are going to down regulate our number of serotonin receptors, break up 2 out of 3 of them so that we're down to just one. And what's the result of that? Yeah, there's tons of serotonin signaling, but blunted sensitivity to it. And the net result is we get to the wonderful euphoric one asterisk state. What does this begin to explain clinically? It produces this really distressing prediction that, at least in a subset of people, depressions might get worse in the first few days when SSRIs are first doing their thing. And maybe this is the subset of people who are most vulnerable to this. And what it also predicts is this downregulatory response doesn't happen immediately. It's downregulating some of its receptors over subsequent days. That's why it's taking days. Notice what we've done here with the SSRIs. We've boosted up the serotonin signal 33%, making things even worse. We've knocked out 66% of the responsiveness at this end. The net result is a blunting. I'm not convinced this is what's going on, but this might be one of the models, and it helps to explain the suicidality. It helps to explain the delayed effects of this. Most people don't like it. I don't know if I believe it, but this is a possibility of what's going on, built around the fact that if you change how loudly one neuron is screaming, you could change how effectively, how sensitively another neuron is listening, and they don't always perfectly match. You can get overshoots or undershoots.
So, to wrap up today, we're going to shift topics. So, Pradeep from Australia says, although the universe that we live in does not have free will, hypothetically, if you were given a chance to design a universe with or without free will, which one would you choose and why?
Well, this question came in a while ago, and for weeks now I've been saying, I really don't have an answer. And I've thought about it, and the answer is this one is way outside of my pay grade to be able to like choose whether or not the universe should have free will. So this is one that would have to get turfed to God, so to speak. So to speak. So it would have to get turfed to God. And what's clear is even in like classical Judeo Christian theology, there's stuff that God cannot do. God can't make a boulder too heavy for him to lift. God can't sin. God can't make a triangle made of more than 180 degrees. Thomas Aquinas festered over this one for a while. God could never go to the movies and be surprised by a surprise ending because he's always going to know. One of the resolutions to this is said that God can do everything that can be done. But there's simply some things that can't be done. You can't make a triangle with other than 180 degrees. So within this realm, granting now God the power to decide if there's free will or not, and I get consulted, um, my vote would be yes, there should be free will. There should be free will because it's really nice to praise somebody when they've done a good job, and it makes everybody feel good. And pathetically, the way we are wired up with dopamine, it actually also feels good when you are righteously punishing someone. So those are great if there's actual responsibility and culpability. This is going to work only under one condition: if there's no such thing in the universe as luck, good or bad. So God's got his handful at that point, in that he's got to get a universe in which there's no Brownian motion, in which there's no nonlinear chaoticism, in which, photons of light don't vibrate between being particles and waves or whatever they do. You got to get rid of all of that stuff because free will is only morally reasonable, acceptable in a world in which nobody ever is rewarded or punished for something they had no control over, for something that is just an outcome of luck. So if you could come up in a world in which there's no luck, yeah, go for it with free will. It's still not clear to me how that would actually work. What's clear is this is a tall order to expect God to come up with, especially if you're not entirely sure if God exists. So I'll stop at that point.
And that is all for episode 31. Keep submitting questions at the form found in the Instagram story highlight and bio or the YouTube video description. I'm Offspring Sapolsky, and thanks for your continued support of Science and the Beard.